Welcome, everyone. My name is Philip Mondor, President and CEO of Tourism HR Canada, an industry organization with a mandate aimed at building a world-leading tourism workforce. Tourism HR Canada facilitates, coordinates, and enables human resource development activities that support a globally competitive and sustainable industry and foster the development of a dynamic and resilient workforce. Thank you for joining us today, along with many of your colleagues from across Canada. Today's webinar is recorded. It will be available to you following the session from our website, but we will also contact you direct because you're registered for today's session. You'll have a PDF copy to choose from or the recorded version if you want to share this with others. We also are quite encouraged by any follow-up questions you may have or other information you might be seeking. Don't hesitate to reach out at any point on our website at TourismRecovery.ca. And for today's session, you may use the chat function or you may use the Q&A function. We've got both Heather and John who are monitoring any questions that may come up. And where possible, we will try to answer them along the way. But if for some reason we cannot get to all of the questions while we have the webinar running, we will include the answers as part of the follow-up material. If there's a disruption for any reason today and the session is unable to continue, we will follow up with the full webinar narrated for your personal viewing afterwards. We don't expect a disruption, but we like to prepare in case there may be one. A special acknowledgement to the Government of Canada, for which this webinar would not be possible without their support and funding. This work is part of TourismRecovery.ca, an initiative that we undertook to help the industry address some challenges as a result of COVID. TourismRecovery.ca was launched by Tourism HR Canada in June to help the sector respond to the COVID crisis by providing timely information and practical tools at no cost. You'll learn more about the website as we move along. Information tools are available afterwards. Tourism businesses have asked for webinars to help guide them through some of the big topics. This is one of the TourismRecovery.ca webinar series with a focus on generating revenues. Today's webinar is all about making money and saving money. The bottom line, it's about creating new revenues and helping tourism businesses stay afloat and thrive. Making money, or the reimagining of revenue streams, will look at how tourism companies have innovated and how they've changed their business models as a response to COVID. When we get to saving money, we're going to look at how to reduce spending, also known as belt tightening. Basically, tips on better managing your cash flow and your inventories more effectively. These are often the very things that cause tourism companies to fail if they're not managed well, especially in lean times like we're experiencing with COVID. We'll also point you in the direction of government relief programs like CERB or the wage subsidy program or the rent relief. Many of these you would already be familiar with them. They're not subjects we'll spend time talking about today, but we'll certainly give you an idea of where to get information. Okay, let's get started. To start, let's provide a bit of a context. Now, I know I don't need to tell you how the world has changed and that our future will look very different. This is a time of invention, of innovation, and preparing for a seismic rebound in this industry. We know how important it is to get it right and to use our time over the next 12 to 18 months to redefine how we work, how our businesses operate, what the new tourism looks like. This is all about building resilience and better preparing the sector for future disruptions. Simply, it's about having a nimble business model that enables you to be more adaptive and responsive to the ever-changing needs or issues. In the last webinar on strategy, I included specific data slides showing the direct impact of COVID. This time, I'm going to look forward and share examples of what some have done, challenges, and what some have done to inform what they think the future will look like. If you're interested in the data, specific information about how we were impacted, please go and check out the strategy webinar, again, available on our website from the last session. You'll notice as well, as we've said in the previous ones, that we always include cited resources on the slides in case you want to find out more information on any of the slides that we're providing. Now, let's talk about some trends identified by a group called Ideas for Innovation. And I want you to think about these as I go along and ask yourself, do any of these sound familiar or feel like things that you're experiencing? And indeed, you may be thinking about other trends. So let's start. One of the major trends that the industry is demonstrating is a movement from the global focus to a local focus. I don't think anyone is surprised to learn or realize that because of the constraints we have on travel or things like the inability of our health services to respond to major COVID incidents. And so therefore, we are all having to be constrained by how far we travel or other restrictions that inhibit travel. So the shift has moved from the emphasis on looking at global markets and international visitors to focused on more local or regional ones. This is also true of our supply chains and a number of other initiatives. We also know tourism has also therefore gone from the idea of mass and volume and trying to grow the industry to a much more laser-focused interest in making sure that it's quality-based. We have many fewer people to draw from in terms of visitors, so the focus on quality and on tightening our resources to do it are one of the major shifts that we're seeing. Related to that idea of quality is that the consumer or the visitor is seeking more flexible options, things that accommodate their interests and needs, things that help them navigate some of the very challenging times we're all facing with COVID. There is, of course, an interest in companies trying to diversify what they do. Their traditional revenue streams may not be healthy anymore or even existent. This is actually part of why we have today's webinar. So the need to diversify who they serve, what types of products and services they offer, even diversification of suppliers are examples of how companies have had to make changes in order to survive, if not thrive. The focus, of course, has moved more to safety and hygiene. Of course, with COVID, everyone is concerned with the required protocols. Indeed, there are sanctioned requirements, and the industry has done a strong pivot in that direction. And finally, one of the other things that's emerging and is showing up quite strongly is that with the reinvention of what we do, there's also that concept of back better. Really, that translates into the idea of businesses wanting to be far more planet friendly, as I would say, or more ecologically sensible. This is for a number of reasons, but it's because it creates more sustainability, and we are all focused, of course, on trying to improve on those matters. One of the items that are noted by Ideas for Innovation as a key summary point is that visitors are looking for more certainty, more confidence, and customization of meeting their needs. Those three C's, in a way, serve as a bit of a theme for today's webinar. Nearly any shift we're making must make sure that the visitor has a sense of certainty or safety, confidence in the sector, and tailored to the needs that they may have. Now, there are lots of other trends we can speak to, I'm going to shift to just referring to a few others, and that'll set the stage for us. So if we look a little deeper into this and we draw some inferences on the types of consumer trends that are emerging because of this new world order, we begin to look at the changes in consumer behaviors. And this actually gives us a clue on different opportunities for business growth and indeed startups. This is the kind of stuff that innovators and entrepreneurs thrive on. Trends translate into opportunities. It's been a time for us to reflect, and I mean us collectively, all of us, not just the industry, but individually. I think we all struggle a little bit during COVID times and every now and then get quite reflective. We're thinking about many aspects of our lives. We're all facing this disruption in our routines, our relationships, the uncertainty about employment, and much more. It's this very reflection that's causing behavioral change. Let's look at a few examples that you probably will see as very familiar. And indeed, many of you are probably doing either as a consumer or as part of your business. And these are just to get you thinking a little bit about where we're focusing or where we're going, but they're probably very familiar. For example, we do see a lot more of increased delivery and curbside pickup, movement away from brick and mortar and entering businesses because it may be prohibitive. There's a lot more contactless shopping. In our context in tourism, that includes also things like monetary transactions or touch button things rather than handling of cash, for example. Reliance on e-commerce. Rarely do you see people with coin in their pockets anymore. There's less group-based activities. Smaller pods or bubbles, as they're referred to, as we stick within our very close-knit network. There is also behavior around learning how to do more of it yourself, less reliant on others, a bit of cocooning, a bit of shifting towards doing things that are probably parents and grandparents were more familiar with, like a lot more home cooking and a lot less dining out are reliant on fast food pickup. There is, of course, reduced travel as a result of COVID. And it's not just because of restrictions, but it's the practicality of it and the interest in staying closer to home. There's the interest in more outdoor recreation. This is a growing area of quite a large interest we'll speak to in a future presentation. There is also, as we all know, a much bigger emphasis on health and wellness. So these things are not surprising to any of you, and this list could have been longer. Indeed, one of the sources we picked this up from, the list is, I think, twice as long. But the intent here is to just get you thinking about how we have changed. We have changed our own behaviors, whether it's we think of ourselves as consumers or whether we look at how we're doing it in the business. There's some obvious things we've adjusted to and perhaps have now even become a bit of a habit. Let's look a little bit at how EY, Ernst & Young, characterized some key trend changes impacting this sector. In a July 29th report entitled How the COVID-19 Pandemic is Changing Consumer Behaviors in Canada, they reported that consumer spending habits are now shaped by different priorities. The number one priority is about placing family first. At 91% of people that ranked that as their primary concern. This was followed by the need for access to necessities, and this translated into people stockpiling, the concern about finances over the long term. But they also identified an interesting group as part of the trends, and that is what they refer to as cautiously extravagant. I thought that that's a particularly important group to think about, as they have a high level of optimism and are eager to see leisure activities, travel, and vacations return, and they'll be quick to do so. Now, just think about those items for a moment. They appear to reinforce other messages we've heard. First and foremost, people want to be safe and secure, and they all worry about their finances. So they need to respond to this in a way that's practical. Think about it for a moment. What can you offer that will respond to those things? We're going to see some good examples on how that has translated or manifested into practice. Let's talk about PricewaterhouseCoopers for a moment. They published a report called Accelerating Shifts Driving a Radical Rethink of the Customer Journey. And this is part of their Canadian Consumer Insights for 2020. This was published just 3 months ago. And the main messages, of course, are on the screen. But e-commerce, as they acknowledge, has become a real, we all know that's fairly common now. Most businesses have shifted to an e-commerce model. And if you're not doing this, then you're losing a share of the market. And that's because we've all begun to do most of our routine activities by relying heavily on internet access, purchases, and so on. And the other major trend is the off-site services. Basically, what you can offer that's delivered to a home or done in an open space. It's about moving away from brick and mortar or enclosed spaces. Those are the main shifts. One more quick mention to talk about, and I came across this article that was an interview with Bruce Poon-Tip, a Canadian tourism entrepreneur based in Toronto. It's a person many of you may be familiar with. He has spoken at one of our past conferences, and he's a well-known, highly successful Canadian travel adventure company that he operates. For example, last year alone, his company had more than 200,000 people on more than 750 different tourism packages in more than 100 countries. So he gives an idea of the scale of his work. Well, the article says he's just now published a new free ebook, one that I'm prepared and eager to check out, and the name of it is on the screen. Now we could go on, but this whole idea of setting the context or setting the stage gives you a little bit of idea of what we know we're all experiencing. The reimagining of revenue streams is about responding to these trends and looking for new ways to provide a service or product. And it is a challenge because there are many constraints this industry is still dealing with. But for now, some tactics or strategies will help focus on survival. Others are going to look more at the long term, but both are important. Okay, we're going to jump right in here and talk about some strategies. And I'm going to go straight to TourismRecovery.ca for just a moment. Here on this site, as part of the marketing tab, there's an article called Adapting to Market Realities. And there's a few creative thoughts to get you going. Let me introduce a few. The key message is the need to be creative as possible to survive the crisis. The crisis can be an opportunity for change that will strengthen your prospects. And this article starts with 3 points. First, social media. People are using social media more than ever, such as the use of Instagram histories to showcase products and to tap into new markets. The second key point the article reinforces is that people are the need to prioritize customer service as your main interest. This is about being flexible and fair and the need to tailor services to accommodate needs, to avoid cancellation fees, and more. And the third item that this article speaks to is around the idea of adapting to new market realities as a main mindset, that the idea of embracing change is a matter of leadership, and that the new business model you're operating with is one where you're going to always look for change as the way to thrive. This will help not only earn trust and respect of visited travelers, but it will be profitable. Now, this is available on our website with much more detail. I bring it up because we published this back in July, and many of the things we've seen in some of the recent articles are actually reinforcing some of the very principles that this research identified. Going a little bit deeper into this article, there were several ideas that we presented to help get you started. Some of these themes I'm going to be seeing in some of the presentation examples coming up, but let me quickly go in through a few of them. It's funny, when I think about when we published this, a lot of this we were not yet seeing in the marketplace. Today, some of this feels like it's old hat, like, oh yeah, of course, we're familiar with that. We've seen it happen, or we're experiencing it. But let's go through this in a little bit of a way. So in terms of local market, as we said before, there is a shift and a focus on looking at the local market as the place to start. And this is necessary because we don't have access to traditional markets that tourism has relied on, particularly international markets, or really any market that's far away, because it's not practical for people to travel, or there's some inhibiting factors. So for many companies, that's a change. They were not focused on the local market as their primary interest. And the needs are different. In fact, the demographic is different. So too is their interest. This translates into how people are working. Often that means their stays are shorter, or their interactions are briefer, or they're looking for more frugal opportunities that are really meant to just cover off smaller ventures than they normally would if they were traveling afar. Solo getaways is another area that we identified as one of those sorts of things that we would imagine as a trend. There's also something now called bubble getaways, which we'll see in a future sample here. But here, of course, the idea is to respect COVID restrictions by staying within your own bubble, or staying alone, or being isolated. The expected demand for this is growing, and we'll see some actual examples of it. Of course, there's also some practical reasons why this is happening. In some cases, like our hotels, for example, they have actually been serving as venues for people that need to isolate or quarantine, where they're unable to do it at their own home, either because they've traveled from afar or because they work in a health care facility or otherwise, and there's a need for them to be outside of their home and not impact others in the home. There's outdoor recreation as a growing trend. This is showing up in many places, the need for people to be outdoor, to reconnect with nature, to really get back to things that they've maybe been away from for too long. Open spaces are something we can do right now and are recommended, but people are also realizing how much they've missed it, and they're connecting with nature if they can't easily connect with people. Incidentally, prior to COVID, in terms of the growth of tourism, it was the outdoor recreation sector that was whose growth was more accelerated or exponential than any of the other sectors we have. So now with COVID, we just see this trend continuing, or maybe taking a little more traction. Virtual tours were a predicted trend that we're seeing in many different forms. We'll see good examples of that coming up, but clearly the access to the technology to create these is very inexpensive and very feasible. And if you don't know what you're doing, talk to a 15 or 18-year-old and they'll do it for you. They probably have the tools in hand. So there's lots that can be done to showcase what you're doing as a product or a service, if nothing else, just to keep people mindful of where you are and what you do. Discounts and deals have taken traction. We see this all over the place with the need to draw people. It needs to be incentivized. We anticipated there'd be more of this activity, and indeed there is. And finally, the idea of video messages. In the context of social and physical distance, people are feeling very disconnected. So video messages and the use of video material, this very type of webinar as an example, is what people have come to know as how they connect with people. It's as personal as it may get for some of them. This is about your brand showing a bit of a human side and some compassion. It's appealing to people on a personal level. It's as good as it gets next to being there in person. So again, the website has this article and some of these examples to prime you and to get you started. And indeed, it has links to other resources. But let's actually see what's happened. Let's see what some businesses are doing today. We're going to see a lot of creative and interesting ways in which tourism businesses are revisiting their business model. Picking up on the last webinar where the focus was on strategic planning, effectively, the next step is to implement the ideas. And here we have several examples of what companies are doing, and hopefully they'll start to get you thinking about possibilities and how some of these will also help you align your strategic shift to new revenue streams. Incidentally, The PowerPoint deck will include the URL or web link to everything we feature here. So you can go deeper or check it out if it piques your interest. There's a lot of stuff that's in the headlines lately. Watch the daily news and feeds and you'll see more of what we're talking about here. But let's walk through some examples that hopefully give you a good flavor for what innovation we're seeing already. Back on August 13th, I was excited to learn about this initiative in Regina. The Sheepdogs performed for balcony-based audience at the Hilton Doubletree in Regina on this weekend for Krugel Fest. So the stage was set up across from the hotel, and you can see how all of the hotel booked up solid, which, by the way, prior to this was really struggling and had some challenges and difficulties. But it attracted all of these families, all these bubbles of people, I like to say, who were able to watch the concert from their balconies as they played in the lot. This was not only good for the music industry, naturally, but it was for the hotels. It had a huge spin-off as well for local food services and people receiving delivered food and so on. What a great idea. And that was back in August. We've seen since then a lot of other examples of how the music industry or music and events have tried new things. And it's been a particular difficult time for them because they rely so heavily on the season we've just gone through, and they rely on high volume in few events. But they've been trying things like live streaming. They started to get back into concert venues, but of course with much smaller crowds. The freewheeling gigs are the groups that are having the bigger challenges, usually because their performance spaces are in bars or clubs, and these are not open or they're simply too small to meet, to be able to comply with COVID restrictions. But some of these people have taken to parks, or they've joined forces with other small bands and started to look at larger venues as a place to do their shows. Drive-in concerts have become more common. People stay in their cars and they're quite excited by it. It's kind of a revival of what we used to see. Restaurants are hiring bands to play from balconies and rooftops, much like this hotel has done. And one of the growing areas is private concerts happening for exclusive groups in people's backyards. So if the venue is right, this is happening, but it's not without challenges. There's a lot of other things people are trying, and they're helping keep the events and music industry alive. But more efforts are going into virtual models as we move into winter, and still they are struggling to some extent, but they're worth, it's certainly some good examples there. Let's look at another example, staycation. Boy, if that isn't a word of the year. Staycations are being talked about in ways we haven't seen before. Here, the focus was about tapping into local markets. This was a campaign run by a city, and the idea here was to try to get people back to some of the venues that had just been allowed to open, such as museums and other things like that, with a focus on trying to attract a local market. So there was a staycation campaign, and they shifted their narrative and their examples to make sure that it was friendly to local markets. If we go a little bit beyond that for a moment and still thinking about developing a new local market, here's one that I think I just picked up yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, or on the 25th. So picking up on this theme, this article states, as the hotel industry continues to face staggering losses due to COVID-19, a handful of properties in Vancouver are pivoting the business and joining others around the world by offering day-use rooms for people who find working from home too distracting. They're going after people that are looking for a quiet, private space to work. To make this attractive, they're doing this at discounted rates, and they're making sure that the workstation rooms have all the amenities that they need. And according to the article, some of these hotels are starting to sell out. So it seems to be filling a need. It was fun to read the comments section on this article, by the way. I mean, when you read those people views, you're never quite sure what to think about, but there was a lot of innuendo about having to tell your partner that you need to go meet your colleague at a hotel to get some work done. Well, but still, it's another example on how we need to change our frame and think in our mindsets. For those that are parenting or have other distractions at home, this might be one of the most practical things to take on. And if the price is right and it's accessible, why not? Especially if you're doing a special meeting. Okay, let's look at another example. This is also one I collected some time ago in August. In Ottawa, this haunted walk is one of the key products. It's called, but what they've done this year is rebranded their product to call them Bubble Ghost Tours. And they found some clever ways to market this out of what they called out-of-house experience, and they created something they called a premium small group bubble tour. So my message here is the reframing of what they've always done, but the reframing is really basically describing the constraints that they had, but in a way that's friendly to the market. So this enabled them to kind of continue what they were doing, create new packages, and have it appeal to effectively smaller groups, but tailored. I think it was very effective from what I understand. And even the idea of using the term bubble tours was very new at the time. I think it was when we started to hear health officials use this term. So it was timely in picking up on this concept. In the end, most of what they did was just redefine how they did it, reframe, repackage, and it enabled them to continue to do a lot of what they were doing with certain protocols added. Another Ottawa example, just because it was close to home and I picked it up some time ago, but this Ottawa-based company started to offer classes from home virtually, and they introduced food tours. This was new for them. They are a well-known institution, and they used to do food cooking classes and stuff, but they weren't virtual. The in-person classes were what they were probably best known for, as far as I know, and also for production of gourmet food that you could pick up. But now they do virtual cooking classes. These are 1 hour interactive coaching, cook-alongs, as they call them, that you could hone your skills and build your cooking confidence at home. That's how they frame it. And this is interesting because they also will provide all of the ingredients and the tools, and it can also be done with a private group. So they really, really tailored and focused on how they could translate what they're doing, but make it personal. The in-person classes are still available, but they changed how they were doing them so that they could respect the distance requirements and the fewer people that were allowable. And the gourmet food tours was another innovation. This is what they called, or how they frame it, taste your way through the National Capital Region, most intriguing culinary neighborhoods during one of our gourmet food tours. So basically, they started to guide people through an Epicurean excursion, as they called it. So they took it on the road and got people to get to know where to get this stuff. And this is a good way to build a demand for when they'll be able to rebound, and also to incentivize people to take up on the other products they were offering with virtual cooking and so on. So that didn't take more resources for them. That just took a lot of innovation and really just the rethinking of how they could deliver. Let's look at another example. This is an article from Toronto, and it speaks to, it was way back in April, by the way, when COVID was just starting, and it featured what a number of independent small business restaurants were doing in Toronto. And I'll speak very quickly to these, but Popper's Restaurant is one of them in the article. Combined staff, so that they moved to takeout and make at home kits as one of their major new products. And of course, they added groceries. Excuse me, sorry. And they added groceries. This is a common theme that all of them added to what they were offering, is they became a grocery hub. By the way, I've learned of this in other restaurant areas, and this was to help people access foods, ready-made foods that the restaurants were making, but also some of the essentials. It just became very pragmatic. Actually, there's a restaurateur in Ottawa here that I was speaking with sometime around May who did this intentionally because they didn't want to waste all their food supply that they had. And so they were able to offer it up as a retail kind of venture. Another example in here was the OCCO that also launched a grocery marketplace. Customers here can purchase everything from what they refer to as a box of sweets, which is a lot of their homemade goods, like Nanaimo bars and blondies and so on. But they also did this interesting thing with kids selection on do-it-yourself craft and cooking projects. So it's interesting to look at how these places are able to do this. The pivot was quick. The tools were all there. The resources were all there. The staff were all able. It was really just about reframing their product offer and making sure the consumer knew how to access it. I will go on to more of those. The article certainly contains additional samples. This article here talks about White Castle, which is from the US. I think this came out yesterday. I'm bringing it up because it's one example that talks about how they've invested in technology solution. Now, to be very clear, and I'm going to say this carefully, I'm not a strong proponent of technology replacing people, and I'm not sure that that's really what this is all about. But they have decided to do more investment in some of the automated activities. Flippy here is the robot that works in these restaurants to basically help with some basic functional things around their beef patties. There's limitations to what can be done with this, but their point here is that they're promoting this not as a labor solution so much as they're talking about it as a way to mitigate any touching and as a kind of shift to thinking around touchless food and cleanliness, and they're using this as an angle to help promote the way they're working. Salad Works, a make-it-your-home salad chain with more than 100 restaurants in the US, has also partnered with the same company that has this robot technology to start customizing salads for people, where they select from 22 ingredients and the robot goes and pulls it together. Now, this is not for everybody, obviously, not just for the business, not for everybody, but also not for consumers who may not always like it. But you can see that technology might be part of the solution moving forward, and there may be other reasons why technology will start to serve some of those needs. On a more pragmatic level, probably many of you are already using technology. A more obvious example is how cashless transactions are becoming the norm, and in fact, some of them required. So that's the use of technology. One of the other things that I'm seeing very commonly used now are menus that are electronic. So there's no more paper distribution, there's no more handling or having to clean with them. But there's another reason for that. It's everyone's got a handheld smartphone, which they can use. You can always have a few paper copies in the event that the consumer doesn't have it. But this enables businesses to quickly adjust their menus or change their prices as they may need to because of the differences in their product, in their supply chain, or what's selling and not selling, etc. So it gives them more nimbleness to adjust. Let's go on to a little more of a local example with Tim Hortons. This came out of the Financial Post. That might even be yesterday. There you go. See, I've even been able to find stuff in the last 48 hours without a whole lot of effort. But Tim Hortons has been struggling, and particularly because of COVID. As you would expect, Tim Hortons, as we know, had a lot of morning drive-through traffic and breakfast kind of business, if you want. That coffee in the morning was people's lifeline. And then as the day goes along, their business is a little less who their consumer market is. But compared to Tim's sales pre-COVID, their losses have been hugely significant. And so they've also had to pivot and change what they're doing. There's a lot in this article, by the way, but what they basically have decided to focus on is get back to some of the basics, stick with their full breakfast strategy, which is necessary because that's where they can focus on demand, but also there is less food cost and waste and so on. So this gets to the topic we'll talk about a little bit later. But they're also trying to make sure that what they're updating and changing, including their digitized menus and so on, are actually investments on helping them recover and getting back to a more efficient way that they operate their restaurants. So yes, even though they have smaller audiences now and they're focusing on some core products and shedding others that are going to reduce food cost, etc., they're actually doing this with the mindset of improving on the efficiencies of their operations while they're at it. And all of this is driving cost savings while introducing new markets. Now, because of time, I'm going to flip through the next of these with very, very short notes, just to give you a flavor. After all, the links to these are in our deck, and you're going to see a number of other options. In this example, this French restaurant is one of the Michelin 5 stars, took a big hit, actually was forced to close. But similar to my previous note on Tim Hortons, this effort was all around using the downtime to reinvent. Some impressive stuff was done here. They literally changed their business entirely. I just have to show some of the pictures on what they're producing because I thought it was most interesting. But the article goes on to say that 3 months after the restaurant changed its whole model, its team of 60 is still employed, and it's welcoming guests back now with all of their new product and service offer. They've done a lot of work in re-engineering what they're doing and working very local. They invested in their gardens and so on. Now, this may be a little out of reach for many of you, or it's a little bit different than what you're doing, but it does show something else about what they're doing that I think is important and good to keep in mind here. Their images are selling a lot of what they're doing. These are stunning photos. I just have to share them. They're not only showing pictures of food though, they're showing pictures of their people. And they're doing this by showing that they're wearing masks. In other words, they're being very explicit about the fact that they are following these safe and clean protocols. Their website has details on these sorts of things. This is giving people confidence to return and excited by what they're doing. Thrill and a Chill is something that was introduced in Toronto. This is a branded exercise that a whole market pulled together on. There's a famous street in Toronto, basically with several restaurants, and they went through this idea of a campaign. And this is about reframing the experience. Instead of people shying away from being outdoors and thinking it's too cold, no, that's about the thrill of the chill. They're offering free blankets. They've made it a whole new experience and attracted a whole new lot of people again. If you look at this example, this is an Indigenous one that actually is quite interesting. Featured also on the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada's website as part of the recovery program and services that ITAC is promoting. But this is a Winnipeg-based organization, well established before COVID. And they have pivoted to make sure that they now also deliver and take out. This feast, grab, and go market has been their key focus. And like I said in the previous presentation, they've done something very smart. They've included clean images that show how they've responded to COVID to make sure that they rebuild community comfort and confidence in what they're doing. That consumer confidence goes a long way. If you look at Good Lot, this was a hop farmer who lost 37% of their revenues overnight after the bars and restaurants who sell their beer closed in the first wave of the pandemic. Well, they shifted quickly and they now do curbside pickup. And that prompted a 70% jump in their sales. They added product delivery as what they did, something they hadn't done before. And they've adapted to customer needs by helping with different things. This slide is one of the items from their website, and it promotes a number of protocols they have to follow. But what you really read into some of the message here is how they're prepared to accommodate, be flexible. And they're also showing the human side of what they're doing by really putting a face on it and making people feel comfortable with what they're doing. Last Frontier Heli-Skiing caters its audience to a global niche market. And given the small population base in Canada, they traditionally relied on European, American, or Australian clients, 8% of their business from abroad. But of course, this was lost overnight. It was an immediate impact. What they did is they mobilized quickly to suspend skiing operations and to rebook their guests for 2021 at no cost. So this is an example of a service approach. And instead of opting to shut down this winter, they pivoted to move to the Canadian market where they offer a 50% discount. And in doing this, they sold out nearly all of what they had for their season in a very short window of time. By the way, lovely images on their site as well. Sal's, a pizza place, a local pizza joint in the US, well-known and well-established here. They started to do pizza kits that you could pick up and take home or get delivered. But what they also did, which I thought was ingenious, is they branded something for kids as well. Appeal to the kids, and then the parents will have no choice. In fact, call them junior chefs, and it even makes it more attractive. This hotel in northern Vancouver, another Indigenous site, an award-winning place, basically started to look at new markets and new products. And they too emphasize the importance of good hygiene, and that is helping retain their businesses. This is a unique element by hotels, one that I think we're going to have to spend a little more time looking into. I found it fascinating that this hotel chain gathers ideas from clients and then adapts its offers based on what emerges in terms of what works. So they're not only collecting ideas, they're reacting, they're trying them out, they're giving people an idea of how they're working, they're engaging their consumers. And this is giving them a chance to innovate rather quickly, but continue to build the loyalty. A very powerful asset, of course, is the community that they're involved in, but this consumer engagement angle is really intriguing. It says something about the leadership of the group as well. Okay, look, I'm going to pivot now to the second half of the webinar, and I intentionally left it to only a good 10 to 12 minutes because this is one that is a little more academic, but I think is essential and important. Remember, we said at the beginning of this, it's about finding new ways to generate money, but it's also about making sure that we learn how to conserve cash and manage our businesses so that we're not losing money. So where is the money? This is going to look at managing business finances, and we're going to focus on cash flow in particular, but not exclusively. So you're either having to conserve cash, borrow cash, or generate cash, especially during lean times. Now, I know for some of you this is a dreaded topic, but it is essential, and it goes hand in hand with trying to drive new revenues. We're going to look at cash flow, and this, by the way, is number one make or break for companies' ability to survive or grow. If you can't manage this well, you're going to run into trouble. Here, for those familiar with our last webinar, you would have seen examples of this. I'm just showing you one of the checklists that's available on TourismRecovery.ca. And indeed, I'm going to give you a little more of a flavor for what's in here by walking through some of the points from that checklist. So to start off with, the checklist will include some foundational knowledge on essentials of cash flow. Know your business variables includes things like think about seasonal shifts and monthly sales fluctuations and more. Focusing on key principles is another essential element on things like how to reduce costs. And learning how to manage cash flow, of course, is the biggest item. Let's look at this a little more specifically. If we look at that first item, know business variables. For those of you that are not managing your cash flow well, or are struggling, or want others in your team to know how to do this well, This is really a smart tool. It really gets to some of the basics here. To understand cash flow, it really does start with understanding the business variables that affect cash flow. Like what happens seasonally because of the shifts, how does that impact the kind of money coming and going? What about how your inventory is managed? Or any of these 6 items? So getting a handle on these sets the stage. If you have an understanding of what's happening with all of these, you will be able to manage your cash flow or at least make smart decisions about it. Sometimes there's some unexpected assets or needs you need as well. So, you can't predict everything here, but the knowledge of most of these, or as much of it as you can, sets the foundation. And that's because there are some driving principles that inform cash flows. These are probably obvious, but good to keep in mind. You've got to cut your spending. You've got to figure out how to reduce costs. You've got to find ways to drive more revenue. You've got to do something to even out the way the payments are so that you're not, that you're able to carry lean times and rely on times when you're driving more money to cover off those periods when you're not. And you're going to have to know how to monitor this frequently to make adjustments. Now, if you're not doing this already, you're in trouble. And that might be part of the big struggle. So there's tools to help with sorting this out, like how to look at reducing costs or how to change the way you manage your payments over a course of a year. And accountants can be very helpful with this as well. The third principle that we talk about in here is around the idea of identifying potentially problematic issues, such as how slow your receivables might be or if they're uneven. This is one of the bigger problems that people will talk about, or whether there's increasing costs that you're not watching and paying attention to, or even erratic expenses. A well-managed business has got this in tow. They're monitoring these very things very carefully. The more that these are not managed well, the more that a business runs into a cash crunch, a real struggle trying to stay afloat, and then having to make choices that are not always smart. It will basically cost more to run a company if these are not done well. Now, something like increasing cost is an example of a variable impacting a lot of people right now. COVID is driving up costs of all kinds of products that are part of your supply chain. That alone would give you a clue on how you may have to change some of what you do or maybe stop offering some things that you do. If that cheese coming in is now costing you 3 times and you can't get the right menu price on it, then maybe that's something you don't offer. So these are the principles. Now, in terms of the checklist, it's practical. It goes through a number of strategies. I'll be relatively quick here just to give you a feel. Of course, this is that downloadable checklist. You can go and grab more. So in terms of looking at sales strategies, these are the kinds of things you might do. And if you're looking for guidance on this, we can show you some tools that might help. Every now and then I might highlight 1 or 2 of these, but because of time, I'm not going to cover very many because it's, of course, on the screen. And the better thing to do is to follow up and work with this. So one key point in this example, though, is about the payment of customers. If you're in the position of having to collect money from customers of any form, well, you want to get that money as quickly as you can or in a timely way when it's due. The longer this sits without you receiving it, the more it's costing you. And you may need that very cash in hand, especially during lean times. So one thing that people have challenges with is actually monitoring how well they're doing with this. Do you know how late people are or how often a particular group is late? Do they pay in full? Is there a particular pattern to what they're doing? Knowing this information may seem very basic, but it's often not done. And yet it's those very pieces that can help you redesign how you manage this and limit the delays in getting money that should be in your hands. Managing costs and payment. This, of course, is at the bread and butter of a business. And here the checklist includes 10 different things. There's a lot in here that you could focus on. One of the things you might look into is some government tax rebates. A link that we'll show you in a little while gives you some lead on where you can look for it. But there's lots of things you can consider here. Debt consolidation, which is top on this particular list right now, is one of the things that people are forced to do, but it might bring down your monthly payments and keep you afloat. If we're moving to improving cash flow overall, well, there's improving purchasing systems overall. There's lots of things that you can do, but one of the things is to connect with your suppliers and see if you can get a different arrangement than what you may have. This may help you give you extended credit or slow down when they need payments or improve on ways that might enable you to be able to hold more money rather than giving it to them so quickly. Bartering is becoming more of a trend, in fact, and that might also help. Improving managing your inventory matters a lot. We have a much bigger detailed checklist on this, which I'll come to, but this matters because you want to shed product that is not moving, and you want to try and find efficiencies where their costly products are just not returning. You're not getting your ROI on them. Reducing menu sizes, reducing some of what you offer could go a long way in keeping your stocks down and eliminating waste, especially with the fluctuations we're facing. I think restaurants here again, they're open one week and then they're asked to close the next week. Well, what happens with all that stock? You can't let it go to waste. So think smart about what you could hold on to redesign your menus so that you reduce that kind of waste. Also, look at financing options. On this front, I would suggest talking to your banks and your accounting people, but there's different ways that you might look at this. And finally, look at the idea of reinvesting in things that will help you stay afloat, selling assets that you no longer need, deferring projects that have to wait. So this list may not seem overly surprising to you, or maybe it's all stuff that you knew, but you never had it in one place. I encourage you to take down that checklist, think about it very methodically, carefully, check off the things that you're doing, improve on the things you're not doing. This alone can help you survive another day a lot longer, help you focus on some of the things that you might pivot to and change so that you can sustain your resources. Now, as I wrap up here, I'm going to use my next 3 to 4 minutes to just show you a few more things you might want to grab as part of this idea of generating new revenues and trying to save money. The same website includes things like this more detailed inventory control checklist. This may become the subject of a future webinar, but basically it's there for the taking, gives you lots of tips on how to think about managing your inventory to prevent loss, to reduce cost, to help maximize your cash flow, and more. There's a number of key strategies in that webinar, or sorry, in that checklist, and those are listed on here. Everything from preventing loss, reducing cost, maximizing cash flow, and so on. For many, this can also save your bacon, however that way. So there's providing insights on how you can manage what you're doing by using this product alone. It will actually give you some idea of the kinds of things you might want to try, because where you do this well gives you options. Another checklist we have is to help you look at how you can tap into new markets. So here's the tip on how to tap into local markets, the kinds of strategies you might employ as you focus on them. And finally, there's also new marketing and sales strategies for those markets. Again, another checklist to help you. This will actually be the subject of an upcoming webinar where we expand on marketing activities. So our tourism site has so much more. We talked about the employment tracker and the research, the COVID tab, and news articles. I encourage you to visit it. You will have more to work with. The COVID tab in particular is where you're going to find the links to those Government of Canada relief programs I mentioned. So if you're looking to find out more about how those work, the changes that are in place, you can find it there. Indeed, you can find it on any of the association websites. Also, hopefully you are subscribing to our newsletter. If not, I encourage you to do so. It comes out every second Wednesday, which is a week from today is the next edition. It always features some of the latest information we have and will point you to the direction of some of the new tourism recovery activities. TourismRecovery.ca, the website you're probably familiar with. This is what it looks like. As you know, we are now hosting a series of webinars that we are grateful for you to attend. And there is lots of detail within that site with downloadable tools for you to grab. We are going to be featuring our next webinar on November 10th. It's around community partnerships. It will build on a number of principles we've talked about both in webinar 1 and 2. This becomes a very important discussion about how businesses can situate themselves as being strategic and competitive in their communities and to build back consumer confidence. On behalf of the board, I want to thank you all for attending. It's great that we can see the interest in these sessions. We would like to hear from you. If there is more that you'd like us to focus on or different subjects, please let us know. Go to TourismRecovery.ca to let us know what you have in mind. And remember, as we part, remember the 3 W's. Wash your hands, wear a mask, and watch your distance. Thank you, everyone. We wish you a safe day. And we'll follow up with an email so you have a copy of today's information.